Welcome and thank you for joining us. We know it's close to Christmas, but I think it's really timely that we talk about psychological risks in the workplace because, as many of you would know and be experiencing, Christmas is a really triggering time for people, and there has certainly been a spike across all of the states in particularly workers' comp claims for psychological type injuries. So I think it is, although it's close to Christmas, it's timely to have this conversation. My name is Kelly Brown. I am the founder of Recovery Partners. I started Recovery Partners 21 years ago after working for Woolies for 14 years. I started my job as a checkout operator, as many of us did back then, and then went to uni and landed my first job as a return to work coordinator at Woolies. And then, as I say, the rest is history. So I really love what I do. I wouldn't have be doing it for this long if I didn't. And I'm very pleased to have my very good colleague, John Zaharis, joining today. So I'll do the introduction, just sort of frame the topic, and then I'll hand over to John. John has led our new employer team for well over a decade now. So like me, has lots of experience in managing these types of injuries in all jurisdictions across Australia. Before we start, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement to country, and I acknowledge the lands and the people that we're on, which is the Dharawal people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and welcome you all to our webinar today. So that's our topic, manage psychological risks in the workplace. And as I said, this is our caricatures. If you know Recovery Partners, our staff are quite reluctant for the professional headshots, so we've gone with caricatures. So you might have seen these around on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's us. And the mission of Recovery Partners is to reduce the financial and human cost of injury and illness. And as we probably all know, those costs can be significant, both financially, and also the impact on people can be particularly significant. So why does psychological health matters, and why does it matter now in December in 2025? I think, as we all know, a lot of people experience mental health issues. I think it's wonderful to see, particularly in the last 5 years, it be more of a topic of conversation in workplaces where traditionally it hasn't been. So I think that's a good thing that we're acknowledging it and talking about it, but certainly the incidence is definitely increasing. We know that psychological injuries cost approximately 4 times more, and the duration is 4 times more. So for employers and insurers, they are a key focus due to that cost and duration, and also the impact on those people that suffer those conditions is significant as well. We know that employers are facing increasingly complex requirements in this space. And certainly we started to see a few years ago psychological risks and hazards being formally recognised, and employees being required to identify, assess, monitor and control those risks. And lots of the employers that we work with have done fabulous work in this area, but still probably find it one of the most difficult areas to manage. And we hope that John and I are able to share with you today just some tips on how you can do it. And finally, we know that mentally healthy workplaces perform better. When people are happy at work, when they are performing well, the whole business goes well. Our legal requirements, they differ in all states and territories in terms of the requirements. We've got everything from legislations to regulations and codes of practice and guidance material. And as I said before, employers are now formally required to identify, assess, control and manage those hazards that they've identified. And they also need to train and consult with workers. And we've seen a lot of employers invest heavily in this area, not only to fulfil their legal obligations, but also to support their employees and make sure that their organisations are performing as best they can. So that's all you'll hear from me for a little while, and I'll hand over to John now to go through what the common psychological hazards in workplaces are. Thank you, John.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so the common psychosocial hazards, I find that going through the model code of practice, which is available through the SafeWork is quite useful because it lists in detail what the common psychosocial hazards are, but some of them listed on the slide include work overload and fatigue, low job control, role conflict, poor change management, interpersonal conflict, exposure to traumatic events, and remote or isolated work. Obviously, they can be very industry specific, and there's lots of guidance material available through SafeWork that specifies the key controls that could be considered for generically for key hazards in each industry type. And some of them can be environmental as well. So obviously, if there's a lot of issues with a workplace culture at any specific time, it may give rise to increased interpersonal conflict or bullying. If there's some change happening, like pending redundancies or other industrial changes, and that can influence psychosocial hazards as well. Or it could just be things that are common to certain industry types, like we see in the helping professions where there's a lot more exposure to traumatic events and things like that because of the nature of the work that the employees are carrying out. Or other industries where if someone's working remotely, like in a fly-in, fly-out arrangement, they might be isolated or working alone for longer periods, and that might be the nature and conditions of their work. So we've got to try and identify what psychosocial hazards are more prevalent in each organisation, and then work out the best controls to help mitigate those as much as we can.
John, can I just ask, obviously, we've in New South Wales, and I know there's a lot of people joining us today that have responsibilities in New South Wales, and there's certainly been a lot of media attention about the potential reforms for psychological injuries in New South Wales, and specifically the reasonable management action. In your experience of psychological claims, what percentage would you estimate from that reasonable management action as opposed to a specific incident, exposure to traumatic events, those things that will, obviously still go through the workers' comp path?
Yeah, I guess from my experience, a high proportion, usually it's an adjustment disorder that's arisen because of someone being unhappy about something, or their perception that they're unhappy about something at work, whether it's a relationship with their supervisor or co-worker, or a workload issue where they're perceiving that maybe there's not enough hours in their day to do their work and they're suffering fatigue or burnout and things like that. So I guess the reasonableness of the actions on the employer's part is a tricky one, because that can be variable. And I know that the way the workers' comp scheme in New South Wales and most other schemes will exclude claims that have arisen as a result of reasonable action by the employer, but there's usually sections in each act that sort of exclude that. But so yeah, I know in the work that we do, we often don't stay involved in incidents that have been excluded. However, I would say that the majority are due to that interpersonal conflicts, and obviously it could vary from industry to industry. If you're a first responder, you're probably going to see a lot more of the acute stress disorders and other presentations that might be specific to an incident occurring.
And we'll still see those claims of assaults and that are happening in the course of work, and they're very hard, obviously, to prevent. And I should just say, for anyone, I just checked the chat. If you do have any questions or comments, please pop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as we go along.
Great, yeah. So I sort of touched on this already with regards to controls. So yeah, we obviously want to identify the risks and then look at the consequence severity, all those factors, using a hierarchy of controls to then work out how we're best to mitigate that. And again, it's usually something that we would do where we look at specific industry guidance material and then implement that, but then also look at things that might be unique to an individual workplace. In terms of some of the things listed here, like the work design, it might just be about, like if someone's working with a high caseload of distressed clients or clients that exhibit unpredictable behaviours, it might be about sharing that load, or it might be about making sure those people have extra training or extra support around them, like maybe more regular check-ins or other controls that may be more appropriate in that regard. With environmental factors and breaks, it might be just about making sure there's adequate staff rostered on at busy peak times and things like that. And with the interpersonal stuff, it might just be more about having processes in place, like a procedure to resolve, bullying, harassment, or other things, and having a process available to employees where they can feel confident that they can report those incidents and have confidence that their employer is going to adequately investigate them and take action at the conclusion, but also creating awareness of those things within the workplace as well, so that staff have that awareness of what to look for, even if it's just early warning signs that someone might be displaying certain symptoms because they're being impacted by a psychosocial hazard.
And I think that obviously sometimes it's really difficult to put in a control, and I'll just share an example of one of the issues that we've had at Recovery Partners. We obviously, the type of work that we do, we like to think that we're a good employer. We are rated as a great place to work, which is an independent study that's done every year, and we work really hard to do that. However, some of our staff, despite our best efforts and intentions, have been exposed to inappropriate behaviour. To give everyone an example, obviously what we do, our consultants will go out and do medical case conferences, and in the past we've had 2 separate consultants in 2 separate states have inappropriate interactions and definitely unacceptable behaviour of a sexual nature, harassment by the GPs where they were attending, and that was certainly something that wasn't on our risk register. We didn't anticipate it. It happened the first time we put the appropriate controls in place, but as an employer, things like that are just very, very hard to control, and it's very, very unfortunate that these things happen. And when they do, I think that what we've managed to do well is to provide the right support and education and assistance to those people. And as an employer, it's really frustrating, and I'm sure there's people on the call today that as an employer, you've done everything that you can to protect the health and safety and well-being of your employee, and in the course of their doing their job, they've been subjected to something that's almost completely outside of your control. So I have a lot of empathy for our employers who are trying to do work in this space, because we know from our own experience it can be very tough to try and eliminate them all. But there's some good tips, John. You're on mute, mate. You've muted yourself.
Sorry. So I was going to sort of add to that earlier that it's like it's a cyclical process where we're always trying to identify hazards, and new ones might pop up all the time. We're trying to consult with our workers to work out how to best control them. We're implementing those controls, and then there's that constant review process. So we want to make sure that those controls remain effective. And the work environment's constantly changing. There's always new things happening, and new. It just changes the risk profile. So it's like a constant process that we go through. Sort of already touched on this earlier. Just creating a work culture where people feel that it's safe to speak up, report concerns, or ask for help, and that's important to allow things to be addressed as early as possible before they get to a point where they're far more challenging and costly to resolve. And that starts at the top with, from the top down with good leadership, transparent communication and consistent follow through. So not leaving things unresolved and people losing confidence in the processes available to them. So just on some of those leadership behaviours that reduce risk are things like actively listening and being curious about what's going on with employees. I know we're fortunate here that Kelly does that really well, particularly through some of the weekly meetings that we have internally. She seems to know everything that's going on in most of our employees' lives, which is nice. But even just doing early check-ins, and that's something we encourage across our leadership group. We try and keep our team sizes relatively small so that each leader can have good working relationship with their direct reports and check in with them. Most teams have like a weekly forum where, being able to report things like file escalations, if there's anything concerning even just general issues or WHS related matters or inclusive in all of those agendas. Just ensuring that we have a caseload policy here, which allows us to do to make sure that everyone's got a reasonable workload and they don't feel overworked. And we have structures in place that allow us to utilise contractors if we've got busier periods in peak times or a lot of leave going on, and having that distribution within an organisation is helpful to reduce risk as well. And just being able to provide support post-incident. So I know internally we have a range of things that we use that are specific to recovery partners, like having EAP offerings. We have a Mind Hub, for example, where people can reach out and access resources, which is really sort of pre-EAP if they don't feel the need to seek EAP type support. And just Kelly mentioned the Great Place to Work, which is a culture program that we're a part of that helps drive some of that stuff for us as well, because, if we don't implement and live by our word, we don't achieve good results in that culture rating. So did you want to add anything there, Kelly, about?
Yeah, I think that it's as leaders, and I learned this from my days of Woolies. I had a mentor, and he said, you can juggle like 5 balls. Just so you can juggle 5 balls. You add a 6th one in, you might be able to get it, but you add the 7th one in and you start dropping things. And I think as leaders, the biggest challenge is having adequate time to be able to check in with staff and be able to create that space for them to be able to talk to you. So when we have our team meetings, how is everyone good? If you get that as well, we do it via Teams. But when you start gently probing, or what are you doing on the weekend? Tell me about how your day was yesterday. It's then that people start to open up and confide, and you learn a lot as a leader about what is really happening. And just to share a recent personal experience, we consider that we're quite a good place to work, but we did have a cultural issue in one of our sites. And like many of you, I sensed something wasn't right, but, my 150 emails and my 10 client calls were taking the priority. But it did require me to stop and sit down and talk to people and really identify what the cause of some of the issues were. And for us, there were some cultural issues. We had people from very, very different backgrounds that perhaps weren't understanding each other. And we had to do a fair bit of work just to identify what those issues were and address them. And it wasn't a nice situation, but certainly the outcome has been very good. But John, as you know, it's doing this type of work is time consuming, and we've always got competing priorities. But there's effort, the reward for the effort of making time and space and listening to employees and understanding what's really going on and not sweeping things under the carpet, even though I think sometimes that can be the default because it's an easy thing to do. In the long run, particularly when we're talking about psychological risk, it's best to identify it as early as possible and address it as early as possible. That would be sort of my most recent experience, John.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Just with some early warning signs. So we sort of touched on this a little bit before, but just sometimes it's just about making observations of, you know, people's mood, what their body language is like, things like that, and if there's been a change, and checking in to see, you know, what's led to that change. You know, sometimes having mental health awareness training run through your organisation could be a useful way of having employees being able to check in on each other as well, or even just having a leadership group undertake that type of training so they can have better awareness of how to identify some of those signs. The other thing we can look at is just performance, absenteeism, or presenteeism, like is someone not really performing at the same level as what they usually are in their job? Is their attendance patterns changing? Are they, you know, always turning up late or maybe having increased sick leave? Yeah, and just if they're reporting specific symptoms, headaches, fatigue, things like that. And just their social interactions with their peers as well, or with customers, you know, whether there's a change in their mood. All those things can suggest that, you know, there might be something going on that's impacting them, whether it's work-related or otherwise. And I think outside of that, there are other things employers can do. Especially if employees are working individually a lot, maybe they can't make this, you know, direct observations. Sometimes having like an external organisation organising a check-in, or having, you know, access to EAP and just finding other ways to have conversations, whether it's Teams meetings or connecting via phone and trying to pick up cues that way. In terms of support pathways, so we've touched on EAP already, just having that available to staff, potentially doing psychological or OT type assessments. The OT type assessments can be good for things like fatigue or looking at ergonomics, which can also be relevant to work demand. Like if there's a, if someone's working a really fast-paced job, there's a higher volume of work, then looking at ways to mitigate that. We're seeing an increasing use of using AI to help mitigate some psychosocial hazards as well, which is really emerging now. Conflict mediation is another one for interpersonal conflict. So having different levels of mediation that can take place, whether it be informal mediation that can happen within the workplace, just through whether it's the internal team members just catching up informally or with the assistance of a people and culture team, or whether it requires something more significant like an external independent party to facilitate that. Adjusting duties and the environment. So that might just be, if someone's stuck doing all the more stressful work, then just balancing that out between teams, or looking at roster arrangements, or just adjusting their work, and just keeping a trauma-informed support available, especially for those first responders or those that are working in helping professions.
I'd be really interested if anyone on the call has had some successful outcomes with mediation. I feel that it's really underutilised. I know in Victoria, as part of the scheme, there is a service facilitated discussions, and the consultants who are accredited to do that are actually of a very high calibre. But in the recent information we got from WorkSafe, it seems to me that it's a really, really underutilised resource. And I know that I haven't seen it used too much. where I think that as a potential support pathway, it would be very beneficial. So if anyone does have any experience with meditation, with the mediation, not meditation, with mediation, if you'd be happy to drop it in the chat or raise your hand either now or at the end. I'd be really interested just to hear about those experiences, because it seems to me that that is one that's really quite underutilized.
So what does early support look like? Yeah, we already spoke about doing regular check-ins within 24 or 48 hours, and that would be probably if you're identifying something's not right, just to particularly to do that type of check-in. Yeah, having that access to EAP, early allied health triage, that might be more relevant, again, for those first responder or helping roles, where there might be exposure to vicarious trauma and things like that. You might need some additional controls there through an allied health check-in service, and then a weekly wellbeing follow-up. And again, that can be either done internally through the leader with appropriate mental health awareness training, or it could be something that you could outsource and get an external agency to provide follow-ups, even if it was quarterly, in a combination of both. Why early intervention works. We've already spoken a little bit about how that can help reduce claim duration or the onset of an incident. So really, early intervention should start before an incident occurs. So it might be trying to ensure you've got the right person in the right role, and that might start from the recruitment and onboarding process, making sure there's a thorough induction process available so that people are confidently able to do their work, and decreasing the risk of things like burnout or feeling like they lack support and supervision to do their role effectively. Creating a good workplace culture, which can reduce conflict and job dissatisfaction, things like that. Creating that environment where people trust the workplace's policies and procedures and things get followed through. And just maintaining a respectful workplace can all help reduce incidents from occurring. And then obviously there's, if incidents do occur, the post incident intervention, such as early reporting of injuries, early triage, promoting the recover at work message, not having people away from work, and just addressing any of those barriers really early on. This is a bit of an extension of that early intervention, just embedding that early support. So it's important to normalise wellbeing conversations, and I think we do that really well by having that as part of our agenda. We try and ask people within our teams, what they did on the weekend, or just show an interest in their life outside of work as well, just to see if there's any changes in their behaviour. Regular debriefs. We do a lot of work with distressing clients at times, so being able to chat through that, whether it be with an employee's colleague or ensuring they've got a leader or a support available to be able to do that. And again, sometimes that requires things like accessing EAP at times, making that available, or reminding people that that's there. Or for us, it might be using our Mind Hub resources. Regular check-ins with staff, and undertaking quarterly psychosocial risk reviews. So, and that might be just through having either a committee specifically assigned to look at psychosocial hazards, so an extension of a work health and safety committee or other consultation group that you might have within your workplace, and just making sure that psychosocial risks are included either as a separate agenda, or if at times it might be beneficial to just have a separate forum. And I know here at Recovery Partners, we have our consultation process includes a separate safety, a psychosocial safety component, and that group catches up and specifically looks at psychosocial stuff.
Excellent. Oh, I've lost my mouse. It's back. You've muted yourself again, John.
Yes, I know. Yeah, so our early intervention model, it's pretty much an extension of the last slide. So doing that early triage, providing that support and the follow-up. And if it's post-injury, ensuring there's suitable duties and planning attached to that.
I think that I'm out of the, I'm close to our injury triage service, and the most important part that I see from this process is providing the support to the managers, because what we find is with a physical injury, people are confident, they know what to do, they know what to say. They provide lots of support to the worker. They've probably had a lot of experience with it, but as soon as there is any kind of psychological component to it, the employer can feel less confident then, and the line manager can feel less confident because they just haven't had that experience, and they're generally worried or concerned about what they say and the impact that that might have. So in our triage service, we actually find that our psychologists who are providing this support spend more time with the managers than what they do to the injured person, because they're the people that really need the support and the hand holding. And we know how important it is for the employee to have a good relationship with their employer. So we're there to sort of supplement and hold hands, but giving that support and advice to the line manager is very, very important. And a common theme, John, the slides that we've gone through, is that follow-up and monitoring. And I think the biggest mistake that you can make if you are dealing with a psychological injury or illness is to say you're going to do something and then not do it, because you're dealing with a person that's in a vulnerable state. And it's much better to, as the old saying goes, under promise and over deliver. I think that that's really, really important, that particularly with these psychological injuries, that follow up, if you say you're going to call on Friday afternoon, that come hell or high water, that you call on Friday afternoon, or you send a text and say, I've had an emergency, can I call you later? Can I call you Monday? Whatever it might be. And I also think that suitable duties can be really scary, particularly if there's something has happened in the workplace. But the types of support that we can supply is we can look for temporary suitable duties somewhere else for that person, because we all know that connection to work is very important, and particularly for those psychological claims, which we know are 4 times more expensive and take 4 times as long. If we're able to keep them engaged with work, that is half the battle, and it will make it much easier to reintegrate them back into their pre-injury position. So I think it's very important. And the other experience that we've had at Recovery Partners is that some of the psychological claims, they don't get that support as fast as what a physical injury, not because people don't care, it's because they don't know what to do. Or it may be that the person's been absent for 2 weeks and they haven't picked up the call, and by the time they do speak, actually I'm off work because this happened at work 2 weeks ago. So I think employers can really benefit significantly by getting in early with any kind of psychological claim. I think this is a case example from us, John.
Yeah, it's a case example in the transport industry where a worker was exposed to ongoing customer aggression and showing early signs of stress. So the manager did a check-in. We were able that they reported an incident through our triage service, our IRC. And so we had a IRC assessor triage that person on the same day. They were supported by temporarily removing them from the aggressive customer. They're offered EAP. There's some weekly check-ins done. And the outcome was that the worker remained at work, their symptoms improved, no psychological claim lodged. which is a good outcome. And obviously, the employer was then able to follow through and do a bit of a risk assessment and just try and have a look at, is this something that's prevalent across their other employees that may contribute to that happening to another worker, or do they have adequate controls in place to mitigate that from becoming worse than what it got to.
It was a potentially nasty one that was had a very good outcome.
So just some key takeaways, that psychological risks are WHS risks, and it's become increasingly prevalent in our WHS law. Early intervention is really key, just getting in there as soon as possible. Again, encourage that be done pre-incident by having good processes in place, having good policies and procedures, developing that strong culture that follows through and resolves any disputes early or picks up warning signs early on, having that those support structures in place, whether they're EAP or other service offerings, and just looking at ensuring that people are appropriately trained to have the right support to do their work, and there's active triage processes in place to pick up on warning signs.